Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. In today's video, we are going to cover the 4 different editing modes in Pro Tools. When I say editing modes, I'm referring specifically to these 4 little buttons up here: Shuffle, Spot, Slip, and Grid on the editing. You'll notice it isn't present on the mix window, on the editing window of Pro Tools. So each one of these works in a slightly different way, but they're all going to have to do with different changes we can make to audio clips or anything else on our timeline in Pro Tools. So let's just jump into it, and we'll start with one of the 2 that I find myself using most often, and that is Slip Mode. Slip Mode is an editing mode that allows you to select anywhere on the timeline, make changes anywhere you want on the timeline, and it will not impact surrounding audio as a result of that edit. However, you can make changes to that audio manually. It doesn't happen automatically. Here's exactly what we mean by that. I'm going to duplicate this track. We'll go here on Windows. I'm going to do Alt, click, drag, duplicate. Awesome. So you can see here with Slip Mode, wherever I click my mouse, it is going to set our little cursor to. There. Anywhere I want, anywhere I select, I can make that selection and it will follow my movement exactly. By contrast, Grid Mode, you can still move your mouse anywhere on the timeline. However, any selection you make will default to the closest line on the grid. So if I click here, this little bar line or beat line is closest, so it's going to stay there until I click further out and get to another bar line. So it's a little bit more prohibitive, and you might be thinking, okay, well, if I wanted to select something, why would I default to grid when I could have greater control with slip? And the answer is precision and speed specifically. If you're working with a track where perhaps you've made a beat that is already nice and quantized and perfectly matched up to the grid, then you can just edit in grid mode and for certain everything will be precise. You don't have to worry about being a few milliseconds before or after any bar line, and it'll make things easy to work with. So that's really what makes these different, is the ability to select either a very exact location or just have your selections snap to the grid. And I should mention too that snapping to grid will be whatever you have your grid resolution set to. So if we go to this area of our edit window, you'll see grid is selected. If I were to go here, it's still going to snap to the grid line even though it isn't immediately visible. Slip works the exact same way regardless. However, you can see grid resolution here set to 1/8 note. If I were to switch that to quarter notes, then now it will no longer snap in that 1/8 note. It's going to go right to the quarter note. So very important to consider when you're working in grid mode is what your resolution is set to. Let's go back to 1/8 note. So 1/8 note, not half note. There we go. So that's the first part of the equation. The other part, as I had mentioned, is when you make edits to an audio clip, you won't have anything happen automatically as a result of that. Any changes to the location of that audio clip on the timeline needs to be done manually. Here's an example of that. With Slip Mode, I can select this, I can hit delete. Nothing else happens, only the what I selected gets deleted, and that's it. Same thing if I wanted to work in here. By contrast, Grid Mode, it's just going to be selections along the grid, and if I hit delete, that part stays the same. Nothing else happens to that. If I want to move where this is, let's say I want to bring this a little bit closer to this other audio clip, then I can go to my little grabber tool here, and you can see if I'm in grid mode, that clip is going to snap to each part of the bar line, and you can't move it in between bar lines. You can, however, if you go to Slip Mode, then you can move that clip wherever you please, and it will follow along. So those are the 2 most basic, and at least for what I do with Pro Tools, I'd say the most frequently used editing modes. Let's get into the slightly more exotic editing modes. Let's start with Shuffle. Shuffle, like Slip Mode, allows you to make selections and placements anywhere along the timeline with a clip. The difference comes into what happens to that clip after you've made your editing, or after you've done your edit. Presuming that we are, deleting something, let's just go ahead and make a selection here. And let's say I want to delete this much audio out of here. I'm in Shuffle mode. I'm going to hit delete and watch what happens to the rest of this clip here. You can see it's deleted that, and it's automatically snapped everything else up to the end of what we had selected before. So you can see this right here. Let's redelete that. And it brings everything over. Likewise, if I make a selection past the actual clip beginning or ends, so right here is where I have this selection made, and I hit delete, it's going to bring that to wherever that selection was. If I use my grabber tool and try to move it back or forth, you can see nothing's really happening. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. But if you move it far enough to the left, it's just going to bring everything back to the very beginning of our timeline. So very interesting. Why might you use that? Well, where I find myself using it most frequently is for audiobooks, voiceover, narration, whatever it is, where you want to have everything kind of slid over as far as possible, and you're trying to make something cohesive out of things that could have a large break. For instance, if you have an author reading part of their book for an audiobook, and there's a long break in between paragraphs for them to take a sip of water, do whatever they need to do, you don't want to have to go in, select it, hit delete, go to the grabber tool, drag it over, try to line it up just right. In the audio editing world, that takes far too long. Shuffle mode's going to do all that for you. So what I have prepared here is kind of a mini example, a little bit of voiceover. This is a test of shuffle mode. All those words way too far apart, but using shuffle mode, I can go in here, make exact selections in between each word, delete, and then it'll shift it over. And by the time I've completed this, this will sound maybe not exactly like a human reading a sentence or reading a line out of a book, but it's going to sound a lot closer to the point where we haven't had to spend too much time editing and doing fine-tuning, and it gets us a little bit closer. So let's listen to it now. This is a test of shuffle mode. Simple enough. So that's shuffle mode. The final mode I want to cover is spot mode. On the surface, spot mode looks almost identical to slip mode. With our main selection tool and highlighting tool, we can go anywhere on the timeline. We can select anywhere on the timeline. We can delete, and nothing is going to shift. So what exactly is the difference? Well, spot mode allows you to bring in audio clips to the timeline at an exact location based on whatever your grid is, whether that's minutes and seconds, bars and beats, samples, you name it. Okay, why would you want to do that? In the film, television, audio landscape world, oftentimes you need to align audio to a very, very specific point on the timeline to correspond with what a viewer might be seeing on screen at that point in time. If there is a car crash, you want to make sure that the audio for the car crash, which is almost always going to be recorded separately, matches what people are seeing on screen. So typically you'll get, they're called spotting notes, where, okay, I've got my list of audio clips and I've got the list of where it needs to be. I'm going to go into my session and line it up to that exact point. So let's take a look at that in practice. I've got over here some clips, some different edit points. I'm just going to grab this and bring it down to a track in spot mode, and you'll see when I do that, we get a spot dialog prompt come up. So in this case, we've already set our grid and our resolution is set to bars and beats. So it's saying, where do you want this clip to begin in terms of bars and beats? For the sake of argument, let's just have it start on bar 3, beat 1, and I'll have our sync point as bar 3, beat 1, and you can see the endpoint auto-populates. So even though we dragged that track down here, if I hit OK, it's going to create a new track that is beginning exactly on beat 1. It's hard to see, beat 1 of bar 3. And that's spot mode. Simple as that. So those are your 4 editing modes. Hope you found this insightful. If you have any requests for any other functionality in Pro Tools, let me know. Otherwise, see you on the next video.